It's going live.
Okay. Awesome. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you might be tuning in today. Thank you for taking the time to join us today as we discuss the private sector intelligence industry in Africa. So I will hand it over to Kulani here to briefly tell us a little bit about the African Intelligence Studies Collective, which is organizing this seminar today, and sort of the early career scholars group that has also put on this program over the past few months here that has brought this, this topic today.
Thank you very much, Bukie. I think I won't take too much time, but to briefly introduce the African Intelligence Studies Collective. It's an initiative which originated in Addis Ababa and was primarily scholarly oriented to begin a very academic conversation on intelligence and security affairs in Africa. Anything as far as intelligence history, intelligence cooperation, and just building understandings which will not only capacitate the understandings of the ongoings with the African Union's new corruption frameworks, but also to help younger scholars and also forthcoming policymakers to understand the realm of government secrecy, the functionality of that, and also understanding outside of that how to process intelligence and security affairs in the new information era. And so we also started an early career scholars group, which was supposed to help young scholars to bridge onto and to have conversations in a pre-academic platform, which allows young academics to interact with current practitioners where and when we can, and to also drive conversations that will hopefully prompt people to start writing and analyzing larger sort of strategic affairs, whether it's within the government or also within the private sector. Thank you very much, Bukie.
Great, thank you for that brief introduction. So going over to today's sort of panel discussion, we have 3 panelists today, including myself, and we will sort of go through and do introductions of each analyst. And then the overall structure will be that there will be a number of questions that will be asked, moderated by me. Each of these questions are sort of designed to allow the panelists to share their experiences and share their thoughts on the private sector industry, private sector intelligence industry in Africa, based on their personal experiences. And then after that, we will open it up to the floor, to the audience, sort of have ask any questions they might have for the panel. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Jide to give us a brief introduction.
Thank you very much, Bukie. Hi, guys. I'm Babajide Ogunleye. I'm a tactical intelligence analyst. I've been working in the private sector intelligence in Africa for over 5 years, and I'm glad to be joining this conversation. Looking forward to a fruitful deliberation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Bukie.
Thanks, Jide. So I'll hand it over to Kike to do her introduction.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kikelomo Shodeko, and I'm a security and risk analyst, intelligence analyst, anything that has to do with research, analysis for not just one part of Africa, but for Western and Eastern Africa. So it's a pleasure to be here. I hope we do have a lovely discussion. Back to you, Bukola. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Bukie Olokun. I am a strategic intelligence analyst working on, sort of a more global portfolio at the moment, but have spent time working on the continent and working on continent-wide issues. And definitely looking forward to sharing experiences here today and just hearing what other panelists have to say. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into the questions. So I'm going to start with you, Jide. In your introduction, you said you are a tactical analyst. So what does that mean? What does that look like, being a tactical analyst in Africa? What does that look like?
Thank you very much, Bukie. Tactical intelligence is an aspect of intelligence that deals with, say, day in, day out aspect of information gathering and analysis, which is opposed to strategic, which is more of long-term forecasting and high level looking at what will play out in, say, 2, 3, 5 years. Tactical deals with, say, today, tomorrow, next week. So the space of tactical deals with, say, protests, security issues that may impact, say, an industry staff, industry operation, say, today, tomorrow, next week. So, that bit is what I cover, really.
Okay, thank you. And Kike, you just said you're an intel or a security analyst. So what does that mean? What does that look like to you?
Okay, so basically, it's almost like what Jide does. It's the same thing. The difference is just mine is a bit more streamlined to the issues happening in Africa. So it's a bit more specific. Of course, due to the nature of the work, we extend ourselves outside Africa and we try as much as possible to look at something that might have occurred in another part of the world and try to see how to mitigate responses in our own part of the world. So not only do I gather intel, I analyze them for today, tomorrow, and the future. And of course, the most important part, seeking solutions, seeking security solutions that are tailored to the scenarios and to the issues that happen in our continent, Africa. So that's just a summary of what I do as an intelligence person.
Great, and I think that's sort of a great segue into my next question, which is what sort of differentiates an analyst from, let's say a journalist, right? Because you talked about sort of gathering information. What would you say is really the difference, right? Because you're reporting on something, a journalist is reporting on something as well. What would you say is the difference?
Still at me, Bukola. So the differences are that the journalist is more about sensationalizing any news they get. So they're all about, oh, who's gonna be reading my news? The fastest clicks. Nothing, no source of importance to the extent of that people get to hear about the information. Whereas an analyst's job is basically to put together all the information you have, look at it back and forth, present, future, think of it in a broader sense, and of course, look at it into the future and how it might affect businesses, it might affect the private sector, even the public sector, and how that comes back to haunt the private sector in itself. So the journalist is more interested in the news story in itself, while the analyst is more interested in the objective aspect of how does this news affect the country at large, the company, or whatever it is in that sense. So that's what I can say concerning those differences.
So just to touch on what Kike has said, while a journalist is looking at selling his market, gathering information, and then just blowing it out to the general public, say both local and international audience, I think an analyst is more streamlined to the industry you are working on, to the government agency you are working on. You look at the implication of this news to your system, to your industry, to your client, your employer, your management, and look at how it affects them. Then you do something called predictive intelligence. You look at what does this news mean for the business? What does it mean for the future of this business too? Because and a journalist just writes the news, while the value or the content, the value you are bringing is to look at what has happened and say, and so what next? Now, where do we go from here? Look at that news and analyze it, look forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jide. And I think you both made great points, right? Which is that, as an analyst, you provide sort of the so what, that additional context to a tailored or particular audience using tailored products, right? And it's not general in a sense, right? Because at the end of the day, what an oil and gas client, for example, might want or might need may be very different, right, from the intelligence that you provide to a tech company, for example. And so that definitely plays into the differences there. So if we say that sort of, a journalist's job is to provide information, as quickly as possible and to get it out there, what happens in a situation where, as an analyst, your manager or your client, your management has somehow received this journalism information, right? They've gotten the information on a particular incident before maybe you as the analyst were able to gather or to collect this information. How do you then handle a situation like that?
Thank you very much, Bukie. In an instance where your management gets an information earlier than you, I mean, the value you also bring to that is to add the context to the news, say, analyze it, make meaning out of the news, because what your management or your leadership has is just the news, right? So the value of the analyst, the intelligence analyst or risk analyst brings is to interpret such news to your management, give them what it means for the business, and also advise them on what you think they should do, not just give them the implication, advise them on the actions they should take if they should avoid going to such an area, if they should go with robust mitigation, say, if they should go with security escorts or go during the day instead of going during the night or whatnot. I mean, the news will not say that. So that is the value you would add to the information the management has gotten. But like I always say, I don't think you are getting it right if the management always gets the news before you, really, at some point. Because as an analyst, you have to be, you are the security focal point for intelligence information as long as that is concerned. So if they get it every time before you, it's not really where you're meant to be.
Thank you.
Jide is very right. Yeah, sorry, Bukola. Jide is very right. I think each and every one of us have had to basically gone through something like that, where maybe when you just started out, you weren't able to capture everything that happened, and management or your manager or even a client reaches out and they're trying to get you to understand that, oh, this location you put there is incorrect, or this incident, the number of the person, the fatalities, all the casualties are less or are more, and at that moment in time, you need to not be egotistical about your role in that sense. Understand what the client needs. And at that moment, you do not need, there's no need for a tug of war between you and your client or you and the management. Just accept that there and there you have made a mistake. But what you should now do is what Jide has enumerated. And that is, you look at it and come out with how intelligent you are as an intelligence officer in this case. And so you're coming out with, oh, they said there were 5 deaths. Oh, yeah. Initially, on open source, you come up with our techniques, how technical it is, the things that separate you from the general news. You will be shocked that management or clients are as emotionally attached to the news, but you as an analyst, you are not allowed to be emotionally attached. You're supposed to be objective at every moment in time. So definitely, what Jide has said, then you just include all those other technicalities and you make them understand that, yes, it's clear, yeah, I did make an error in this aspect, but this and this and this are the additional information that you need to know to make a decision. So there's no need for anybody to be erratic about anything. You don't need to have so much emotions everywhere. Just make sure that you're objective, you keep that objectivity so that the result will be that there was a proper response to that error, that occurred. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Those were all really great points that you made. especially about obviously providing that additional context as an analyst, but also, reminding people that as an analyst, you should sort of be at the front and center. It's the expectation really that you're not necessarily ahead of the news, but you stay on top of things, right? You're able to get that information as it's coming out. And I'm sure this is something we will touch more on as we sort of go through this conversation. But your contacts, your network, verifying information, et cetera. And so that is really where you're able to step in and sort of rectify that situation. But we touched a little bit, or we've talked a little bit about forecasting. And Jide, you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about the differences between tactical and strategic analysts, right? You talked about forecasting, which as analysts, we can't predict the future, but we are able to sort of look at trends and look at patterns and say, well, based on this this trend or based on this pattern, we are saying it's likely or possible, that a certain situation or a certain incident might occur. But the question I have now is, in an environment, obviously we know all across Africa, in different countries, in different cities, we have issues where incidents are more erratic, right? We might not necessarily be able to identify these patterns or trends, right, that sort of allow us to come to certain conclusions or certain possibilities. So how do we manage those kind of environments for clients when you are faced with these sort of erratic incidents? Kike, I don't know, would you like to start?
Okay, sure. Okay, the truth is, just like you said, forecasting, let me just put this joke out. When we started out as analysts, so every time in part of our analysis, you actually have to put down like the forecast for the next week or for the next month. And so, we used to joke around and say, it's not like I have a crystal ball in my room that I check to know what the next incident will be. So why are you putting me under pressure to figure out what's happening, the next week or the next month when we don't even know what will happen? But the truth is, these people have become experts, and now they cockily go, yeah, I know it's going to happen next week. And sometimes you get really excited when you see your forecast come through, but like deep down you feel really bad, and you're like, oh, so many people were injured in that unrest. But the truth is, you're feeling like, oh my God, yes, I got it right. I checked all my data was correct in the outcome of this protest, or in the outcome of this election, and so on and so forth. So forecasting it's an integral part of being in intelligence in itself, because forecasting is part of why we have crisis management and emergency responses. Because without you forecasting, you would not need crisis management. And in crisis management, we carry there are a lot of functionalities, there are a lot of techniques, there are a lot of processes that need to go through. So forecasting in itself is very integral to our jobs, because it keeps you ahead of even the news. When you know what happens next, or when you see an incident, for example, you can easily say, okay, I know what happened in this incident. It's not as you picture it. And even to the extent that it makes you come off like a lawyer, or a judge, because you're so used to maybe the incidents occurring this certain way, and you already know the outcomes, before they even come, because previous data show that this is a consistent thing that happens. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we just rest on our oars, considering previous analysis or previous data. We also look at the trends in place and how these things can easily shift. They can shift from one part to another. And so those are the things you have to keep abreast of as an analyst. And this is what we do. It's just part of us. It has become part of us. For example, it was shocking for us when during one of the elections in Nigeria, that we didn't have high cases of violence. And so, but if we look back, you know, it was always like that. And so you can easily say, okay, yeah, the reason we didn't have violence is this, this, and this, you know. And so that is how we as analysts really help companies make decisions, citizens make decisions, and even the country make decisions. Thank you.
Hey, Jide, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, she's spoken length and breadth on what I would also have to say. But mostly when making forecasts, I mean, in a fragile security environment where things are very hard to forecast and predict, I've been always told and trained to always look at the worst case scenario and the likeliest case scenario. Look at like when you are doing a scenario analysis, look at the worst case scenario and look at the like. So you base your assessment in between those two. Just like the NSAS issue in Nigeria last year, a lot of people could not forecast that it would degenerate to that aspect. If, as an analyst, you are told to say on the first day the demonstration started, if you are told to make a forecast on how do you think it will end, you just say it will be like the normal protest in Nigeria, where after a day or two they would all go back to their houses. I mean, look at the first day it started; they were sleeping in front of government house in Ikeja. They were just like 10 people. But if you were going to base an assessment on that based on worst case scenario, you just look at, say, it might degenerate, but the likelihood is low, but you have already said that it will degenerate. So they won't say you did not say it will degenerate, but the likelihood is low, really. So you look at the worst case scenario, and the best case scenario. Thank you very much, Bukie.
That's awesome, Jide. Thank you. And thank you as well, Kike. I think I like what you said about, you know, probability there. And, you know, in these kind of situations, always helps to sort of have a caveat, right? Where you just say, you know, again, we expect this, however, XYZ situation is also a possibility, right? Or you then put your assessment on a most likely, less likely scale, right? And that gives you, as an analyst, a little bit of wiggle room, because like Ike said at the start, there is no crystal ball. There's no way to predict for sure exactly what is going to happen. And when you don't have enough data, or when your incidents are sporadic and things are fragile again. And you still need to make these predictions. You still need to do this forecasting. You're able to sort of work with your language and the vocabulary you decide to use there to sort of allow you have some wiggle room. So while we're still on sort of forecasting being an issue, I was hoping both of you could probably give us maybe one or two challenges that you have experienced as private sector analysts in Africa, and maybe how that has affected your work and how you've dealt with it, if you have.
Okay, Jide, I hope I can go ahead. So basically, I can tell you that there are some Francophone countries where open source intelligence on incidents that occur in the country are almost non-existent. Now, that's where we get the idea that, oh, it's a safe country, things are not why? Because things are not out in the media all the time. You know, you wouldn't know if there was a burglary or a theft or whatever. So how do you forecast that kind of environment? You know, that is the first thing that comes to your mind, because first and foremost, you're not even getting the information you need from the open source to even help you gather proper data to now forecast. So, you know, you're always, okay, for example, in Niger, the only time you know that there is insecurity in an area is because there's a curfew in place on open source. Isn't that interesting? So when they tell you, oh, the governor of this particular region put out a curfew from this time to this time because of the insecurities. Okay, so are you telling me there's really insecurity there, but I'm not seeing anything on the news? So how do I forecast the next time there will be an attack, for example? And we know all through the sub-Saharan African part of West Africa is really suffering the issues with jihadist and terrorist groups in that area. So you only forecast based on the activities happening in other countries surrounding the space. So for example, we can talk of Nigeria, we can talk of Mali, we can talk of, any Chad, we can easily use those ones as the forecast for another location, but it's not so easy. And so that's one of the that's an example I can give when it comes to forecasting and how it can become really challenging and difficult to put in place a proper forecasting process. When you're doing your analysis, you have to think of severity and occurrence. And when severity and occurrence is practically inexistent because you don't have data, then there's really nothing you can do. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll go ahead and give one challenge that I faced as well, which was just especially starting out. You do, sort of like Kike said, have an issue with access to information, but most especially timely information. You can wait for 48 hours, 3 days, 4 days to sort of get the full picture and get enough information in a situation. But when things are sort of moving fast and developing quickly, you need to have as much information as soon as possible, especially in a tactical setting, right? Where usually the information that you provide is needed either that day or to make a decision for the next day. And I definitely ran into that issue quite a bit, which was getting the right information, obviously, and then in a timely manner. And I think where that was where sort of the network and your contacts or your connections really come into play, or in that case came into play, where it's like you're able to sort of tap into other people as resources. And that might be either in the private sector or in the public sector. And we have obviously a number of groups all across the continent that, WhatsApp groups that sort of come together and share information. And then within those groups, you have sort of contacts and networks that you can reach out to either verify information or just gain access to information. However, that takes time to build because one, people need to actually be confident and comfortable enough with you to actually share information with you. But also, you have to just build those relationships, and that absolutely takes time. And so I would say that is definitely one of the challenges that I have experienced, and I know a number of people have also experienced as private sector analysts on the continent. Jide, I don't know, do you have any examples that you would like to provide?
To be honest, I think you guys have really dissected the issue. I think an issue we actually face in this role is, lack of information sometimes. I wrote it down as the information bias or lack of it thereof. For instance, there is an operation going on in the part of Nigeria where there is where there has been shutting down of internet and network access. How do you get information from that area, really? And you are expected to predict. So in that instance, you have to use your institutional knowledge, what you know, what you just use, like you said before, the likelihood and the probability caveat. So, because this is a role where information is the ingredient of analysis, really. You analyze as much information as you have. So what do you analyze when you don't have information? That's it.
That's a great point, and we have a lot of countries in Africa as well that suffer from sort of government censorships and internet shutdowns and things like that. And, those even happen at crucial times, right? Where as analysts, during elections, for example, you need that information, right? So if there's an internet shutdown, how do you access information, right? Where do you get this information from? But I think we've touched a lot on sort of OSINT and, using the internet. But I wanted to ask the both of you as well, how important is your human network, your contacts, your network, your connections to your day-to-day job functions? And Jide, you can start.
Yeah, so to be honest, I would say that they are extremely important. They help with giving direction. Direction in intelligence is the first stage of information gathering, where you even know what to look for. They help with direction, with telling you what is going on in every area. And they also help with confirmation. If you have an information from open source, you want to confirm or gather additional information, you will go straight to your sources. And also some open sources, if they are biased, or you see that this guy is leaning towards this side of the argument or leaning towards this for obvious reasons, you will have to go to your sources for information. I will give an example. One of the ways I met Bukie, who is also on this call, was trying to confirm a series of incidents going on in Abuja. I remember during the lots of demonstrations were going on in the FCT, and I was looking for someone to help me collaborate with, because interplay of information was circulating on social media, and I needed a stronghold on what was going on in that area. So I feel like OSINT is really extremely important. Thank you. And also, just to go on, just to consolidate on that, open sources, you can't talk to them and they talk back to you. But human intelligence, you can talk to them and they will revert back, and you go back again. You can retax them. If you want more information, you can retax them and they will come back to you. But for newspapers online, you can't ask them. The questions you ask them are rhetorical, really, because like, if there's any missing link in an information, you can't fill it up. But for human intelligence, you can always retax, wait for them to come back to you. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, Jide, you're right. That part is very intriguing, because you really can't like talk back to the newspapers when they get crazy with their writing. But one thing I can say about human intelligence is it becomes more and more important now, especially with internet shutdowns. You know, we are getting governments a bit cracking down on more, or clamping down on more human exposure on the social media, for example. So human intelligence becomes more and more important. And I remember when Dr. Adewale, one of the directors for the director for Halogen Academy, when he took us on one of our meetings, he was talking about, there was an argument between how, one of the topics was talking about how open source is becoming obsolete, because now the humans come forward when the internet is shut down, and our open source is basically, before it would have been the, you know, the village area or the market square, you know, where people are chatting up and you're learning about incidents. But our open source is now the internet, basically. So we rely considerably, I would say 80% of the time, on open source, but more and more governments are clamping down on information of any kind. As long as it's not beneficial to them, they're ready to clamp down. They're ready to clamp down on media also. So the human intel has become like gold, you know, very important. And I think as things evolve, the human intel might become very, very important, you know, and come to think of it, even what we call open source is some sort of human intel that is put into in media that we share, you know. And so human resource, I think I would put it up above open source, then I think out of bias, maybe open source afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I completely agree with what you said at the end there, Kike, which is that I think the unique thing about private sector intel in Africa is that sort of that human network is almost the foundation, the backbone of the work you do. And then really OSINT just almost supplements or complements that. In a lot of other places, you can actually usually rely on open source, you know, have that be your first stop, and, you know, you can get a lot of information there. You can verify a lot of information just, you know, purely using open source intelligence. But in Africa, I think, you know, that is secondary, quite frankly. Just because, again, so many gaps, you know, you have the timeliness of the information, the bias in the information as well, et cetera. So Kike, you talked a lot about sort of government clampdowns, which again, great segue into the next question here, which is sort of the battle between allegiance to work and allegiance to the country, right? So within the country that you work, you might want to have a bias if it's especially if it's your country, right? If you're nationalistic and, you want to portray a good image, especially if your company or your managers, whoever you work for, your employers are international, right? You want to portray the country in a good light. Where is the balance there? Where is the balance between saying, hey, this is the actual situation. It's not great. The government is doing this and this or that, or, sort of protecting your country and your country's image.
Oh, well, yeah, this question is very tough and uncomfortable, but we're digging. Okay. So basically, of course, you feel some type of way, simultaneously as you report on things, you're trying to sell your country in a good light too, because your country kind of have a reflection on your personality. We here are still trying to understand that is how your country is viewed, that you are viewed, and some of us that do understand that, we just feel some type of way putting out all those information like, these things happen in other places. It's not, it's even worse in other places. So why are you so caught up in our own place, But the truth is this. As an analyst, the first thing you are is objective. It's just that's your nature. It becomes your nature immediately you come into this job. It might be difficult at first, the way you write, the way you flow into topics, the way you understand what you're being required to do as an officer, But the truth is, you learn the objectivity as you go along. You understand that whatever you are putting down on paper or on your computer is something that will be used to the benefit of other people. Is mostly, we might think that it's the company that benefits, but don't forget, these companies, they actually have assets. They have humans, and the most important asset for them is on most occasions are the humans. Even your nationality are part of the assets. So that objectivity part of yourself remains in the pole position while you're okay. I'm an African, so I shouldn't present our stories in the most gory way or in a gory no. We should you'll remain objective one way or another, no matter how much you want to, cover your ass, because consider that the decision that you make, they actually look to you. What you put down determines how they go about their function, how they go about their processes, how they go about their strategies. So it's very important that the balance always will be when you do get an opportunity to speak, you can now make it a bit milder, but what should be clear is that this is the situation, this is what might occur if these are not put in place, and at the end of the day, this is the results. So what are the solutions? The solutions are, we really need collaboration with the public sector so that it will not just be like you're trying to cover the ass of your country, but that there is actually ongoing kinetic and non-kinetic operations happening in your space. Thank you.
So for me, I would say thank you very much. I go with you on objectivity, like you said. I would say just report the information as it is. Don't try to color code it or fine tune it, because you actually run the risk of misleading your customer. You could feel like you have just say it as it is and just do your job. Really, there have been instances where, say, you get reports of 78 people killed or 70-something people. It's frightening, really, for the customer. They would even come back to you like, what is going on here? But that is where you come into with your analysis. Say, be factual and say maybe this is occurring in a different part of the country where this business is not operating, or it just shows the threat area. Be very factual in your analysis. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Thank you so much, JJ. And I completely agree with both of you, right? As analysts, we should be able to be objective. We all have, subliminal biases, obviously, just as humans, but being able to suppress that and, give the information as it is, without usually the I guess, journalistic side of even like fluffing up the story, or trying to make it look fancy, sensationalizing it. As an analyst, none of that is necessary, right? You present the facts, you present the information as is, and then you give the additional context, right? There was this incident today, and here's how it impacts us as a company. Here's how it could possibly impact us in the near to long term. You know, that was great. And I think just as a follow-up question here, how often have you as an analyst seen your analysis go on to actually impact decision-making, right? Because everything that we do, everything we've talked about has been, okay, at the end of it, you provide that additional context so that decision makers are able to sort of take the information that you've presented and make certain decisions. So in your experience, how often has that been the case? Has it changed as you've sort of progressed in your career? Do you think the more experienced you are, the more likely it is that your analysis will actually be considered, or has it always been that way from the start? Or have you not experienced, you know, a situation where your analysis is actually factored into the decision-making process? Jide, we can start with you.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, as you grow and you continue to know your threat environment, as you grow on the job and continue to know the area you cover, your analysis begins to get more exact, more accurate, and your customer begin to quite often listen to you, and whatever you say, after a while, whatever you say really is what the client will do. I would say that that also ties into the forecasting you spoke about how accurate is your forecasting. I would say after a while, what you predict and when they see that what you predict actually is the fact, and it comes to pass, I mean, they start taking your assessments and your analysis and whatnot. Thank you very much.
That's true. Yeah, I like what Jide said about growth. You know, it makes a lot of sense, you know, the growth aspect. Bukie, I hope I didn't cut you off when you were trying to speak. Okay, sorry. So like that growth aspect, it's one thing as an analyst where you are like, as you grow, you get better at it. But I can tell you that I have so many instances that my analysis or my cautionary tale made the company I work for, you know, make decisions that were accurate, you know, at a particular moment in time. And, you know, it made me see how important my role is as an analyst. So like now I'm called all the time before a final decision is made. Okay, so should we go in or we should not? If I say don't, they don't. You know, I have colleagues in other companies call me and say, I'll call her. She knows what to do. You know, she knows what's happening in that area. She has the information. And I get those calls and they're like, oh, what should I do in this kind of situation? And I say, okay, this and this and this is what you should do. And so like Jide said, the growth, when you get to a particular stage as an analyst, they begin to listen to you because from time to time, you have been accurate on your analysis and on your forecasting. And I remember having a conversation with someone and it was like, if you can hack the forecasting, you're gonna make so much money in the private sector. So let's, hopefully we can get some sort of reign of ideas when it comes to forecasting so we can make a lot of money in the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kike. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jide.
No, I was just going to say about how motivating it is when you give an advice and it is listened to, or how when your forecast comes and gets accurate. It makes your customer, your client depend on you a lot, and even your analyst partners too, from other industries, from other areas, even from government officials. They end up depending on you, and it I would say sometimes it actually turns to a burden because you actually have to get it right because a lot of people are relying on you, right? You need to really do your spade work, and it makes you more diligent. You follow the process, the stages to gather the information, analyze it, and be very accurate, very sure you are accurate. Really, that's just to pick on what Kike earlier said. Thank you.
No, that's all great points. You know, I completely agree with with everything you both said. I think as analysts, that decision making, right? When you predict something or you forecast something and it actually happens, I think as analysts, we don't forget that feeling, right? It's definitely a feeling that you feel proud of yourself, you feel accomplished, but then over time, the more accurate your predictions, the more likely it is that your analysis will be taken into consideration when it comes to decision making. And I've seen that more in certain companies more than others. I've seen that in some situations more than others. But I think it's always comforting to know that really as an analyst, that is the end goal, right? That is the objective, right? You are there to provide information that will aid in decision making, right? That is what your purpose is there as an analyst. And so we strive every day, obviously, to provide the most accurate, the most up-to-date information, because we know that our employers, our management may use that information, to make decisions. And a lot of times, obviously, being in the security sector, these instances, these decision-making situations could possibly have life or death consequences, right? These are not likely situations. It's not a, it's not a decision that's made lightly. These have grave consequences sometimes. And so being a part of that process, especially when you are right, is definitely a plus as an analyst. But let's dive a little deeper here into, you both touched a lot on sort of growth, and then being knowledgeable, being the go-to person on a certain situation, on a certain region. So let's dive a little deeper into expertise here, and subject matter expertise or regional expertise as well, especially private sector. How long do we think it takes before an analyst can be seen or recognized, or what does it take to be seen or recognized as a subject matter expert or as a regional expert? Kike, do you want to start?
So I would, I think Kike, you're on mute, but let me just go first. I would say, I think it's on a case-by-case basis, really. I wouldn't say for a year, because I mean, it's dynamic. The issues in Nigeria for an analyst is not the same with an analyst in Ghana, not the same with an analyst in Cameroon. So, but I think after a while on the job, you just know your audience, know your onions, and you begin to be a subject matter expert in analysis. And also, like I said, it's not regionally specific. If you take an analyst in Nigeria to Asia Pacific, after a while, the analyst will begin to deliver, because he already knows the skill, he knows what it takes to do the job. He might not know the threats environment in Asia Pacific, but once he settles in and understands the environment, he begins to dish out well-written analysis and well-tailored forecast. So I would say there is no one but a straight answer to that. It is just say after a while on the roll, really. I don't think there's like say a month in any way you find yourself. After a year, an analyst should be. I would say it is relative.
I think that's a good point. There's definitely no time frame. Also because everybody sort of learns at different paces. It might take one analyst, 5 months to acquire a certain level of information, and the certain level of information might take another analyst, 3 weeks. So I think, each person is different. But I think what you really touched on there, Jide, about, the audience is key for the second half of the question, which was more like, what does it take, right, to be viewed as a subject matter expert? And I think that really comes down to the content that you provide, right? if it takes 5 months or if it takes 3 weeks for you to learn the job, it then comes down to the product, what you're able to deliver, what you're able to produce, not in quantity at all, but in quality here. Are you able to deliver to obviously target audiences, the information that is necessary, and then obviously also just over time, the depth of information that you have, right? Because it's one thing to know about, maybe ISWAP, for example, but it's another thing to really know the depths of it, to know the history, to know who the leaders are, to know how often the command or the chain of command changes, to know, the ties and where the funding comes from, et cetera. And so that generally takes time because obviously that knowledge is acquired. And that is something that just happens over a certain amount of time. So I don't know, Kike, did you have anything else that you would like to add to that?
No, you guys touched on everything when it comes to this subject matter expertise thing. So some people believe that if you're able to navigate a particular area on your own, say you do backpacking for like 3, 4, 5 months, you're already an expert on the area, or you're able to live in the community, a particular community. Say, for example, maybe a community in the northern area, and you've been a witness consistently of maybe attacks on them. It's believed that you are sort of an expert because you already have you have a knowledge of how those attacks occur. Now mingle it with your analytical skills, that just makes you, just separates you from the pack immediately, because people will rather listen to what you have to say than I that live in the comfort of, say, Accra, for example. Like, I'm in comfort of Accra and I'm like, okay, nothing is really happening, and I write about those things. So there's always that aspect that deals with that in itself. And Jide is very, very correct that as long as you have those skills in place, if you're thrown anywhere in the world, it's just a matter of time. You will pick up on the what is necessary, like what are the important things in that area. So yeah, you guys are very correct on that aspect.
Okay, great, thank you. So again, just a sort of a follow-up question to that. In the private sector, we're generally seen, sorry to use the word general here twice, but we're generally seen as generalists, right? Where you don't have too many subject matter experts per se, simply because as private sector analysts, you're required to wear multiple hats, right? You are the analyst that's covering terrorism, you're the analyst that's covering crime, you are covering civil unrest, you're covering weather incidents, you're covering the Northeast, the Northwest, you're covering multiple countries, you're covering everything that's needed to be covered, because usually, again, private sector outfits don't have the funding, the budget, the capacity to have an analyst covering, or 20 analysts covering 20 different things. So usually you find that 1 or 2 analysts are covering these 20 different things. So the question here is, how then do you become a subject matter expert if you are constantly wearing all these different hats, right? Because we said, oh, it takes time, you have to dive into, that one thing and, figure it out over time. But clearly in this situation, in the private sector, you might not have that opportunity to spend all that time diving into this one thematic focus. So how do you go about that? And is it okay to be a generalist?
Yeah, so for me, I would say as an analyst, it's okay to be a generalist. If you're an analyst covering Nigeria, there are different regions facing different issues. The Northeast has terrorism issues. The Northwest has banditry issues. The South has militancy. The Southeast has separatist agitation. Southwest has general criminality, and also separatist agitation by this this guy that is what did you call it?
Sunday he go home.
Yeah, Sunday
he
ago.
go
Yeah.
home.
So, I mean, I've just named 6 regions with 6 different security issues, coupled with the fact of we still the nationwide kidnapping trend. You can't know it all, really. So, but you will have an idea of what is playing out in each of the regions. You might not be an expert, but you should be a generalist, like you said, have an idea of the trade dynamics, what is playing out. Timelines in the sense of what do they do, when and what do they do. For instance, in the Southeast, they do sit at home, say every October. It's more frequent now, but
Mondays.
It's more frequent now, but before now they used to do it. Say maybe in the Niger Delta. You know that during Independence Day or during Democracy Day, the militant groups start threatening to declare their republic and doing all that. You know that during the Christmas period, the terrorists, they try to escalate their attacks, so just to gain media attention. So being a generalist, I would say, is a good one. You cannot be an expert in everything, really. You might be an expert in the Southwest you cover, but being a generalist in other areas is also a good one for an analyst. Wearing different hats as a generalist is just okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, for me, what comes into play when Bukie talked about the hats was the 6 thinking hats, because it's part of the training you get as an analyst as you go along. So, you're supposed to basically figure out which hats you should wear whenever you're in a meeting, like go through all the hats before before a final decision is made. It's believed that if we do those hats, we can make better decisions. Now, the truth is, because you were very, very clear, we're in the private sector, they'll rather employ just one person to carry all that load. It can be overwhelming. And if you are an expert too, it can be underwhelming, because sometimes you really might not even get an incident happening, say, in the Southeast. So there might really not be anything interesting happening in the Southeast. So what do you write about? We used to have this issue in maritime, when there's a maritime incident. When you have maritime incidents, oh, spectacular, you have what to analyze. But when there are no maritime incidents, so if you're a maritime expert in my office, for example, you just follow for the weeks. There's some times in the month where there's really nothing happening in the maritime sector because there are high tides and the pirates don't even want to tamper with the GOG. So these things, they separate you. They say, yeah, she's an expert in this, or he's an expert in that. Yes, true. One thing I can say is it can be overwhelming because you have to know everything. Like I'm a moving information bot, as you see me. So if I don't have the date right, I know something is happening somewhere. But at the same time, it can be underwhelming where you're just an expert in an area where there's really nothing happening. So as much as it seems less exciting to be a generalist, but I can tell you, like in this industry, it's like easier to be, because at least the times when there are other things not happening in another part, you can easily analyze something in another way. So you can be an analyst analyzing, for example, Kenya, South Africa, and let's say Ghana. Next week, you might not actually be touching those countries, or the next month, you might not be touching those countries. You might be on Angola, Cameroon, and Central African Republic. So those things, they also help your analytical skills, and your knowledge skills also broaden. So there's some things that you can't take away from the fact of being a generalist. There are so many advantages to that. But at the same time, it can get really, really overwhelming. That's what I can say concerning that.
Great, thank you both. I think you both made really great points. Being in the private sector, it can be overwhelming, sort of having to deal with all these different threats and all these different risks and all these different regions and different areas, simply because like Jide very clearly showed with his example, each region can and usually will have its own specific type of problem. And then you sort of have to keep abreast with everything. But then that's where you sort of hone into your skill, I guess, as a generalist, right? And then you, over time, understand what it takes to be knowledgeable on all these different regions and all these different topics and all these different issues. And like you said, at the end of the day, Kike, that ends up usually being an advantage, right? Where it's like you're not pigeonholed into this one specific thing that it's like, this is what I'm known for. This is what I'm good at. This is my thing, right? You don't really pigeonhole yourself in that way, but instead you're able to explore more topics, more regions, more thematic focuses as a generalist. So I'm just going to ask one more question here before we hand it over to the participants to sort of ask their own questions. I think it wouldn't be right if we leave without talking about sort of COVID, which has been at the forefront of everything, over the past year and a half to 2 years at this point. So the question I have now is, how would you say COVID has sort of changed the game or changed the private sector industry in Africa? And I'll give you an example. I'll go first here and say, I think, and this almost ties a little bit into our last question, right? But I think we have all, over the past year and a half, learned to be health experts, right? We now know all these different things about COVID, about, these medical terms. We have been fluid, right? And COVID is now like the number one threat. A lot of private sector companies are looking at or dealing with or battling not even nationwide, but worldwide, really. COVID, you have the numbers going up, going down, changes in, regulations. Can people travel? Can people not travel? And all these different things. So that's just, one way I think COVID has sort of changed the landscape recently. But what else do people think? What has or how has COVID sort of impacted your day-to-day work as an analyst?
Okay, I'll go first. I know that my office had to close, and I was actually the proponent of the closure. Immediately, the government announced that they will be shutting down the country. As you know, the security sector is one of the sectors that was allowed to still continue their operations. But I felt we're opening up the people to danger if we're allowing them to only be the ones coming into the office. So even if there's transportation being provided, we have to also consider the security aspect, that is the physical security, their physical security. Maybe health-wise, it wouldn't have been as bad, but security-wise, you don't know the movement of criminal elements in their area, for example. And so we had to make those decisions to make them stay back at home. Now, another thing I can say COVID has affected is your ability to work without being pushed. You have to come into the office area. You're generally with other analysts, so you can easily like, oh, hi, I'm having this issue thinking about this. What do you think? You can just turn your chair to the back and you're able to just ask questions. But now you're practically on your own. Sometimes you send WhatsApp messages to them and they don't even respond because they're far away from their phones. So all those factors, they play a major role in how these things have turned out. And apart from that, one thing I can say that has happened to African intelligence analysts is that roles that are basically international have opened up to us now. And so that is one advantage I know cannot be underrated, So basically, we now see the capacity of fellow analysts that they are able to transition, not just being restricted to the African sense, but actually extending their knowledge, their competence out of the continent and still sitting in the comfort of their homes. They don't need to travel. They just do their thing from their homes. So one thing I can say is, first and foremost, offices had to close here. Secondly, when it comes to you having to reach out to your colleagues, it's very difficult. It's more difficult now because they might take a while to respond when you have an issue. When you're trying to reach a colleague and say, please, could you send me that report like yesterday? And they're like, oh, sorry, I didn't see your message. Please read your emails, And of course, the third thing is the advantage it brought to continental African continent, analysts and their ability to sell their capabilities out of the continent. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you made a great point there, Kike, especially with, we talked about obviously at the start, timeliness of the information, we need this information in a timely manner, but we also talked about how a lot of that information comes from people and comes from networks, right? And so in a way, if COVID affected people's ability to respond in a timely manner, if I reach out to you, for information and I'm getting that, I'm getting a response from you 2 days later, we're running into the same issues that we discussed with OSINT, right? Where it's like, again, I'm not getting this information as fast as I need it, or, it's just sort of trickling in. I'm getting a response, once every 3 hours or something. Definitely affects the quality of work and the fast-paced environment that we work with here. Jide, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. I think so. I think work from home, like you both said, has really impacted our delivery in terms of peer-to-peer networking, which enhances women. For instance, if you wanted to answer an intelligence question or solve a problem, you could just hang out with a source, say a contact you just wanted to develop with, and you could just talk it through, use a elicitation or get the information from them. But now you do a lot of online stuff and it affects your delivery, like Bukie said. Another thing I noticed during the lockdown period was the emergence of a new threat dynamic. A lot of piracy incidents stopped occurring because, there was no traffic again in the Ocean Gulf of Guinea ocean. So threat agents were migrating onshore. There was increase in crime, say robbery. Even in Lagos, there was increased unrest because people were tired of staying indoors. They said they were hungry. There was agitation. There was this issue of misinformation circulating online in terms of, say, people were saying robbery everywhere. So, as analysts, we are never in our experience seen that kind of phenomenon ever. Imagine emergence of trade dynamics where there was a widespread breakdown, widespread unrest in Lagos, and all that. So it was a pretty interesting period, and I would say I was on my toes during the work from home period when we were meant to be resting. It was not all rest for analysts, really. Because we were meant to be working from home and be typing from our bed, but we had to be on alert because of the emergence of a new trade dynamic.
Absolutely, Jide. I think that is a great point that that we're getting to round up with here. Which is that, quite frankly, I think the threat landscape globally and in Africa as well definitely changed during the pandemic, right? It feels
like a lot of people were not busy, so they began to think of better ways to cause trouble and to just.
People got creative. Some of the threats even changed.
Exactly.
In some places, you had less incidents for a while because everything was closed and people couldn't really go out. Then you see a huge spike in criminality. And it sort of levels off again, and so definitely the overall landscape changed in terms of security threats, and like you said, that changed things for us as well. But I think I would just wrap up by saying that we know this anyway as analysts, right? Where no 2 days are the same. Every day you're sort of on your toes because anything can happen at any moment. And it can be absolutely different from what you predicted, what you expected, but this is the life we live on a day-to-day basis, right? We know and we expect these things to happen, so we're usually not caught off guard. So thank you both very much for answering those questions. Thank you for the conversation. I will pass it over now, or I will go ahead and ask the audience if they have any questions they would like to ask any of the three panelists here today. All right, Kalani, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that there's a lot that's been said about, the sort of professional setup and the sort of environment in which you exist in. But I just wanted to dig into a little particular aspect, since, of course, you've all been analysts who've been focused on either on an African country or having a sort of a continental overview, but also based in Africa. And so you may have a perspective from the, from the sort of standpoint of having to have acquired a job. So you may have this understanding of the types of companies that are available within. I know that there's a prevailing assumption that all of the companies that seek private sector intelligence analysts are foreign companies only. We look at social media giants, which are establishing their offices in Africa. We also look at oil companies, which are externally based, and so on and so forth. I guess, sort of looking at the kind of industry that's available to walk into, not only from the employment perspective, but also to understand the kinds of actors who need this kind of security advisory, that local actors, how many local actors would you say are sort of seeking the type of analysis that you provide? Whether those local actors are capable of having their own internal analyst or a team of analysts, or whether most local actors rely on a larger sort of information provider who has a team of analysts attending to a lot of other people. We won't name drop per se. That's the first question that I have. And then the second question really has to do with, the sort of scope of analysis that sometimes analysts can also sort of attend to, and the sort of growth of this particular industry. That you spoke at length about how it's important to be a generalist, but how some people may look sort of against it. And so, the existence of expertise in Africa to sort of correspond with, would you say that most of your sources, would you say that they're locally maintained, or do you also find that you have a lot of extra African sources, if we can say that, whom you rely on, whom you find have the most clear forms of information? So I guess this is a conversation about the types of sources that you find yourself interacting with, especially considering the unique operating sort of aspects for the African analysts. We have, it's not a problem in itself to have other countries with their analysts focusing on African countries from outside, but you would have this perspective that being an analyst who's on the ground, that you may have certain advantages and certain disadvantages, in the sense that you may have a wider source, a wider range of sources. Say, maybe you would know the kinds of WhatsApp groups to get into, and whether you count being a member of some WhatsApp groups as being open source intelligence, or whether you now perceive that you're doing some covert intelligence, and all those sort of dilemmas. Whereas it may be difficult for someone, say, based in Europe, to cultivate the kinds of sources that you have, whether they're human, whether they're based off of the different type of social media networks that exist within Africa. Thank you.
Thanks, Kalani. That was a lot, sort of, in those two questions there. but do the panelists understand the questions? Do you want me to sort of break it down, or are we good to sort of dive into these questions?
Well, I think I'm good because I kind of understand it was more focused. It was talking about the sources first of our intel. And of course, which other indigenous companies seek our kind of work. So apart from you being an analyst in a company already, are there indigenous companies that run in our space that require our services? So it's pretty straightforward. But it's very thick.
Go for it.
It's very thick. It's very thick. That's the question in itself. When it comes to sources, though, our sources are locals. No, locals have the information for days. They've got what we need. We have those that are retiring from the military, from the Navy. They're generating their own kind of source coding. So they have the information. I don't even think I've ever had to have a non-African be someone that is sharing information with me. I've not had that opportunity, no. Rather, they also feed off the locals that give them the information, at least from this side of where I am at the moment. So it's the locals. The locals have the information. Now, when it comes to the indigenous companies, so what is happening now to the indigenous companies is that they are seeing, when you think of the enterprise security and risk management systems in place, they're beginning to understand that it's not just about the physical security, because most of them are more, it's all about the guarding, physical. But with exposure and how they see that, this other aspect, this other one that looks like just intellectual property and doesn't look so important from afar, is actually generating enough funds. And so little by little, they're gravitating towards not just seeking the services of information, but also building their own internal analysts. So I know I've worked with some upcoming, like some startups that are planning on actually going into this as something. They're indigenous companies and they're planning on starting out intelligence departments, or intelligence in itself as a job or as a service being offered. So I know definitely that this is happening, but currently I can assure you that the biggest clients or consumers of our services are multinationals and international organizations. Thank you.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. So starting with sort of where you stop there, Kike, I think majority of what you find is that, the companies that have most especially in-house analysts are the multinationals, the oil companies, the tech companies, the NGOs. They are the ones that have this sort of intelligence outfits. And I think that's usually because of one, just sort of exposure and, really understanding the need for intelligence. Again, intelligence is sort of supposed to help in a more predictive way and a more preventive way, as opposed to post-incident, now we're trying to figure out how to deal with the mess. Which, like Kike said, you have a lot of local companies that focus more on the physical side of things, the guarding, as opposed to the intelligence side. However, like she said as well, I do think that is starting to change as gradually more companies understand what intelligence even is. I think in Africa, we have a lot of, there's a lot of misconception, there's a lot of, misunderstandings when it comes to intelligence. Usually, that's not even a word that people say freely. It has a lot of negative connotation attached to it. And so I think as more people understand the true meaning and the intentions behind intelligence, then more companies are open to having that. But in terms of again, having, contacts and people on the ground, I think, I do not believe there's a disadvantage. I think 10 out of 10 times, there's probably an advantage to having your analysts, especially covering Africa, on the ground in Africa. I've done both, and I can tell you for a fact that covering Africa from outside of Africa is tough. It's not the same. You are not able to deliver the same quality of work that you're able to deliver when you are present on the continent, especially if, now if you're previously on the continent and you leave and then you come back from time to time and really establish and maintain those networks and those connections, it's different. But just being entirely disconnected physically from the continent, it just doesn't work quite as well from what I found. So I'll hand over to Jide.
I feel like you guys have really done justice to Philani's question. Intelligence is local, and I mean, all your sources are actually locally based. If I have a foreign source, it is because that source knows a local source, and I cannot get directly to that local source. So I have to use my international source to link to the local source, which is not something strange, really. Then about the local companies and international companies, I would say that international companies appreciate intelligence more than the local indigenous company for obvious reasons, really. But gradually, these local sources are becoming enlightened, either learning from best practices or learning from incidents. Learning from incidents in the sense that if your company convoy runs into a protest and you incur loss, you will do something called an after action review or after incident review. That what failed, you guys did not have intelligence. That's why you did not know that there was a protest. That's why you did not know that there was a situation ongoing, or that's why you did not know that there was increased crime in this area. So you will say, what is the solution to this so that it does not happen again? You will find out that you have to either get an intelligence service provider or get an intelligence unit. So I feel like gradually these companies are beginning to appreciate our skills and getting to appreciate us and getting analysts on board their system. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you both for those responses. Thank you, Philani, for those questions. Really in depth there. Definitely got us talking a little bit more about, private sector in Africa. So we're going to go ahead and round up here. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for tuning in. If you're watching this live, thank you for, again, those who participated, and we really appreciate your time, and we hope everyone has had the opportunity to learn a thing or two from this conversation.